Welcome to discussion session 2 of the ChangeWorks System Coaching Program. My name is Dave Miller, Director of Partner Expansion at the Institute for Productive Tension. In discussion session 2, we are introducing you to a core tool that you'll be using in this system called the Change Grid. Specifically, we're going to examine 5 response states or levels of tension that every client experiences. In a future session, you'll learn how the Change Grid measures the level of tension someone experiences, but you also learn how to recognize where someone's tension is even without using a Change Grid. So at this point, you should have completed the discovery session 2 on the introduction to tension, where T covered these 5 response states in detail. If you haven't listened to that session yet, go back and do that now before doing this session. The purpose of this discussion session is to take the material T has laid out about tension and talk about how you can apply these principles and tools in your coaching practice. And with me to have that conversation are 4 of our esteemed faculty members who have all had lots of experience applying ChangeWorks in their coaching and consulting practices. Now you can find out more about each of these faculty members on our faculty page at changeworkssystemcoaching.com. But in the meantime, let me tell you who's with me today and where they're from. So with me today is Jeff Fisher from Denver, Colorado, Paul Hagan from Cincinnati, Ohio, Tom Roseneck from Chicago, Illinois, and Pam Wise from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Welcome, faculty. Glad to have you here.
Good to be here.
Great to have you all here. Let's get started. I wanted to begin with a high-level overview of the system, just to give some context. And you'll be learning this in detail in future sessions. But basically what we're looking at, we're following a process as a structure for a meaningful conversation with our client. So we start by really defining the issue. And I'm sure in your coaching school, your coaching training, you've learned all about doing that. We take this even to another level. We're eventually getting to the point of defining a list of activities. And we're going to be covering that probably in our next session in detail and demonstrating how we do that. But once we define those activities, for each activity, we're going to be assessing the client's level of ability to do that, perform that activity. You know, ability are things like knowledge, skill, experience, and resources. We're also going to be assessing the client's level of challenge or difficulty in performing that activity. So, and again, we use this scale of 0 to 12. There's a couple other dimensions that we also have the client rate themselves on. And then these activities are going to be plotted on a change grid. And T, I think, gave you a quick view of this change grid here. And once we do that, you're going to learn how to debrief that change grid with all these activities and provide some insights to your client. That's just really a high-level overview, but we wanted to give you that context. We're still kind of working with some of the underlying principles of change management and the change grid, mainly tension today. And you can actually see these 5 levels of tension are called response states. They're identified by these 5 wedges here, and I'm going to show you one that kind of takes everything else off the grid besides those 5 wedges here. And these are 5 response states, and you can see they're pretty much driven by how someone rates their ability and challenge, where they're going to plot there. And we're going to be talking about that today. In the first session of this program, we learned about how tension is the critical ingredient that determines when someone will actually take action and make changes. And as coaches, we must pay attention to tension, one of the general rules of this program. And I've found that it's important as a coach and a change management consultant to understand this concept, but I've also found that it's a really valuable concept to teach to our clients. So my questions for the faculty around this are, how have you explained the concept of tension to your clients? Why is tension important to understand, and how does it impact the client's ability to successfully navigate the change process? Paul, I think you had some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm going to be very practical here and say when somebody comes into my office, I have to believe they're there for a reason. And I have to believe that somewhere, whether they realize it or not, or whether or not it's expressed or not, there's some level of tension. And sometimes just simply asking the question, so what brings you by today? Starts to invite that. In some cases, they might say, well, I got your name from somebody, or somebody referred me, or somebody might thought that I wanted to meet with you. I said, well, that's great. I said, but you still chose to be here. What's going on? I think this whole idea of getting them moving in the direction of simply being honest or acknowledging what their tension might be, whether they use that term or not. The other thing that I find is, and I think this directly gets to the heart of what this ChangeWorks is really all about, is to see tension not as a negative. I think a lot of people think, well, I'm tense, right? Or I feel tension and that's bad and I want to relieve that tension. And I try to make it more of a positive. If I can share a kind of a metaphor that I use, is think about you've ever seen these balls of rubber band, like people that store rubber bands, right? They roll them up into this ball, or like the old golf ball, but it's just this tightly wound thing of rubber bands. And people see tension that way, that it's this balled up, thing, and as opposed to the picture I like to have is the tension is more like this rubber band that helps you move forward. You stretch your rubber band and you naturally want to relieve that tension. And to do that, if one hand is out in front, the other hand has to follow to relieve that tension. And I have the rest of the team speak to this a little bit, but those are my two big things right off the bat is to recognize when somebody comes to my office, there's some level of tension, whether they know it or not. And the second is for them to start seeing tension is good. Tension is a constructive emotion or a sentiment to have, because that starts the change process.
That's really good, Paul. That's good. Anybody else have a way they've explained tension to clients?
Yeah, this is Tom, Dave, and piggybacking on what Paul said about positive, and since we talk about productive, I like to use a sailboat. And if you go on a sailboat and there's no wind, it's fun. You can have a beer and enjoy company, but you're not going anywhere. But if you have too much wind, you capsize. And so sailing is always about setting the sail so that the wind is productive, meaning it brings you safely and quickly as safely as you can. And so a lot of coaching is going into unfamiliar waters, and we want to navigate it so that you're clear where you want to go and you set the sail. And the other reason I like that metaphor is sailing requires tacking. You don't go straight. If you're going from Chicago to Michigan City and you try and go straight there and the wind isn't cooperating, it actually takes you a lot longer to get there because you got to wait for the wind to be in the right direction. But if you go sometimes towards Canada and keep moving, but you keep your eye on Michigan City, you'll successfully reach the shore.
Ooh, I love these metaphors. Again, coaches are great at metaphors. Any others out there? These are good tools. Okay, great. So let's jump in and look at these 5 levels of tension. We want to discuss for each level what they represent, how do we define it? How do you know your client is experiencing that level of tension? What are the upsides and downsides? And also maybe look at some actual examples. So let's start with the highest level of tension, which is stress. And I think Jeff's going to talk through his experience with that, with his clients.
Hi there. So just, I guess, piggybacking on what we were just talking about with the sailing and with the rubber band, my analogy for stress is a drowning victim. When your perceived ability is far outweighed by the perceived challenge before you, you start to panic. And when you don't feel like you have the resources available to solve something, and this can translate directly into really any aspect of life, and coaches deal with all different aspects of life. When your client is dealing with a situation where they don't feel they have the ability to surmount the challenge, they start to get into a panic state. They feel completely out of control, or suboptimally in suboptimal control. They start to grasp at solutions that aren't necessarily the best, but it's a solution, so they try it. And I imagine anybody listening and on the call can think of a time where the solution chosen wasn't necessarily the right solution, it was just a solution. And sometimes that turns into an even worse situation. So, I don't know how much we want to talk about moving people out of that situation, but when they find themselves in there, it's really time to address both their challenge and their ability and try to bring those back into line.
Yeah, and we'll get into that in a later session about how to move people around the grid, depending if their level of tension is not the optimal place they want to be given that situation. What would you say are the upsides and downsides of that tension level of stress?
Well, the sort of in nature, if you think of a rabbit, they are moved to action when they get to a certain level of stress. If they perceive danger, if they're hungry, they act. And so if you look at the human nature, the same thing happens. Somebody doesn't do anything on a particular situation until they do feel a certain level of stress, and then they do act. And if it gets too high into what we call stress, that does lead to panic. So getting them to act before they get to stress, or moving them away from stress so that they can act in a more rational way is always the goal. The upside, I guess, is that it makes people go from a non-active state to an active state.
Well, yeah, I mean, I always think of an extreme stressful state as someone being in fight or flight, right? And so, if you're in the middle of a dangerous situation, that may be an appropriate place to be. It's like, hey, the building's burning, without thinking about it and analyzing, let's get out.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
That might be the upside. But then when you think of, hey, I've got to solve a really complicated business problem under a deadline, that might not be the best place to be for that. So again, all this is contextual based on those activities.
And I will say, I work on with a lot of clients that are in the design world, and deadlines do create stress, and deadlines do create the appropriate amount of urgency to stop bickering and start finishing, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So other examples? Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah. Well, this is Paul. I don't know if I disagree so much. Maybe I just have a different nuance to it. I think when we talked about stress, or the direction of stress, moving into it in a stressful way does lead to action, I would agree. But at least as it relates to our chart, I tend to see stress, very little happens. And I'll bring up the same thing when we talk about another side of the chart later in this call or in this talk. But to me, stress is, since we're using examples today, somebody drives their car off a bridge into a river, what they usually drown is, the reason they drown is because they forget to unfasten their seatbelt. They lose the ability to kind of process information. They're in such a panic mode to get out of the car, they literally forget to unfasten their seatbelt, and they can't figure out why they can't climb to the window. So I actually, while stress, the direction of stress, I think, is productive. I think everybody's correct about that. I tend to see that when somebody's in a high stress mode, as kind of marked out here, there's usually very little upside and if something happens, it is exactly that. It's fight or flight, but it tends to not be purposeful, thoughtful, or even the right kind of activity.
Yeah, I think that's almost always true. I would say there's a lot going on, but not a lot of productivity going on. So there's a lot of activity potentially going on. Again, if someone is in that, again, and part of this is like, how do we know a client's in stress? So what would be some symptoms of a client being in stress? How would you know?
Yeah, if I could just piggyback on that, I've had a couple clients. I just let them roll for a little while. I just ask a question or two and let them go, and I pay attention to their speech patterns. And when they kind of barely finish, explaining an issue before they jump off to another one, then they jump off to another one. They're literally bouncing around with no real train of thought. That's one of my very first indications that they are spinning, if you will, or in pretty high stress.
Great. So they're jumping from topic to topic, almost not really thoughtfully. The pace of speech is probably very quick. Anybody else have thoughts on that, of what you've seen in clients?
I would say that emotion rules the day in stress. People get very standoffish or argumentative when they're feeling stress internally. That's how I sort of diagnose it.
Okay. Yeah.
As well as jumping from topic to topic. That's a good one.
Sure. And if you could see them visually, a lot of coaches work with clients by the phone, but if you're working face to face, you probably see a lot of animation, a lot of with their gestures, a lot of motion. Again, it's a lot of activity, but not purposeful, productive activity typically. Okay. Great. Any other thoughts or examples of clients in stress?
This is Pam. I'll
Yes.
also offer that sometimes you get them in the space where it becomes blaming, and there's more internal stress about them, about how it's starting to appear to others. And so it becomes a more outward focus for them. Instead of focusing on what they could be doing or what is going on, it starts to become, what's everybody going to think of me? And so that fear and that upset and maybe embarrassment or everything else comes into play too, that doesn't allow them to rationally think.
Do you think this is a place where you might see some victimization, where someone is playing the victim because they feel so out of control?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, great. Well, why don't we move on to a little bit lower level of tension called power stress. Tom, I think you had some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, so along the theme and what Jeff was talking about in power stress, and since you're going for the positive, the potential dangers or negative, as well as sustainability in the context, the good news about power stress is it's a generally resourceful state and people are eager to solve a problem. There's good energy. They see the challenge is high, but they're feeling more in control than the stress example where they're panicking and out of control. So people are ready to take action and they have resolve. The best way in a coaching context, and I've seen this many times, to say what to keep your eye on is that the gym memberships always go up in January because people are sick and tired of being sick and tired, and they say, this is the year I do something. And so they join a gym, but rarely has joining a gym gotten you in shape. And then they tend to make up for the 6 months they hadn't done it when they were in stress, and nobody can go from no exercise to 6 months worth of exercise, so they quit. And so the thing to watch for is you've got restlessness, you've got eagerness, and if you do a good job of what you were talking about in the opening of this call, Dave, of understanding what they want to accomplish, there's usually a sustainability thing to it. And sometimes, and I know we're not talking about moving around the states yet, but sometimes we need to chill out a little bit even from power stress, because it's until we get the new habits that can support it, because habits is what supports change over time. And so when I think about, I've been teaching for 20 some years, I'm in power stress before the participants getting there, making sure everything is in order to begin the class, and it's very resourceful, productive, and it's a good place to be. But I don't want, if I'm teaching a 2-day program, I don't want to stay in that level of stress the whole time, especially if I'm listening to the participants talking about what they want. So I guess I'll use a specific example of a coaching client who had been the executive director of a legacy organization for some time, and she came to the conclusion that she was now just pretty much maintaining the status quo there, and it didn't excite her anymore. She loved the organization, she loved the people, but she wanted a say in the direction of the company. She wanted to be more of a leader. And power stress was the dominant state. But what we had to recognize is that she had to have new conversations with people, and some of those conversations were up in pretty high stress, and there were some in apathy. And so the idea, like the sailboat, is to keep breaking it down into manageable activities so that the level of stress is moving you toward the goal, which is for her to become a better leader and to shape the vision of the organization. And it really required resilience in all of the response states. So power stress, to keep it really simple, is there's a positive of enthusiasm, eagerness, willing to take action, knowing that resolve, and that's why I did the play on New Year's resolutions. There's high resolve, and the things to keep your eye on that could go out of control if too soon is there's a restlessness, and there's a desire to change things really quickly, and the high level of energy is not sustainable if it starts feeling out of control, because then your perception of your ability changes and it can get out of whack.
Yeah, and so that's really good, Tom. Thank you. I always think of power stress as seizing control. So in stress, we're out of control, and power stress, we're seizing control. So we're kind of on a mission where we have kind of that nervous energy. And if you look at the change grid, you see that the challenge still is exceeding our level of ability. Not as much as it does in stress, but still enough that these could be puzzles that need to be solved. So there's a couple ways we can get into power stress. One way is if we really kind of know what we're doing, but then someone takes away a resource from us, like they impose a deadline where normally it would take us a week to do something and they give us 2 days. That's going to push us up into power stress, and we're going to feel that nervous energy. And there you might see some of the upsides in that we're real efficient, we get it done. It's not necessarily comfortable, but we can do it. But if it's one of those things where we really don't know what we're doing, but we say, hey, I got to do something, it may be somewhat impulsive, right? That can be a downside of it. I think that's what you were getting at, Tom.
Yeah, it can be impulsive, and it also can be not sustainable.
Sure.
Is if you lost a resource, your example is great. If you're an experienced person and you lost a resource and it's a one-time deal, you'll just use your power stress and you'll get it done. But if you're starting to see the world being like this on an ongoing basis, how sustainable is that? And what's it going to do to your long-term motivation? And many times my clients are changing their own standards. So sometimes it's imposed from without, but sometimes they're changing their own standards. But the new standards, the example I gave was that they don't really have the roots yet. And so power stress is really good for getting them to seize control and start taking action. But we have to look at their desired situation over time, are they going to maintain it? So that was the thing. And I'm not even calling that a downside. I'm just saying keep your eye on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they can be out of control and not even know it, and then you're cleaning up a mess from a while.
At a very practical level, coaching a client, if you look at this chart, you're not going to get very far by trying to convince the client, oh, it's not as bad as you think.
Right.
Trying to reduce their perceived challenge. That's their belief around that right then.
And you have to pay attention to that, as you were saying before, about the words they're using. And you don't tell them they're out of control, but you ask questions and they start saying, well, maybe I ought to keep an eye on this.
What moves them to power stress is all about ability. Again, skills, experience, drawing on other skills they have, other resources, and there's other within their control. And that's the real movement. That's the only thing that they feel they can control is their own ability, right? They probably can't change their circumstances.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. So anybody else comment on power stress? Again, one of the ways I look at this perceived ability and perceived challenge, I look at perceived ability as the level of strength you possess, as a metaphor. If we think of the gym and weightlifting, and I look at the challenge as the number of weights or the amount of weight we put on. So if we're doing like a bench press or something, so like when we're in stress, let's say I can comfortably do 150 pounds. That's like a nice weight for me. It's not too light, not too heavy. And someone puts 400 pounds on there, then I'm going to have to try and lift that weight. That's good. That's an example of stress, right? In power stress, maybe they're putting 175 or 180 on there. So it's like, okay, it's not where I would say the sweet spot is for me, but maybe I can do that. Let me go for it. So I found that as a pretty good metaphor to understand these levels of tension too, as we go down. So let's move on to Pam. Did you have a comment on this one?
Oh, I was just thinking, as you were saying that, I thought that's a good way to kind of frame like stretch goals for people. And I like the weightlifting analogy there, that it's just outside of your comfort zone, but it is something new, so the energy stays there and you can go after it without getting too panicked about it.
Right, exactly. Well, let's go on to the next level of tension, which is power. And Pam, you're going to talk about that.
Yeah, so power is really pretty interesting because it's the place where people often feel that they're pretty much in control and they're pretty productive in all of this because they're looking for information and gathering information and processing and planning. That all feels very productive. And I think that one of the things that can be really good about it is people feel like they're moving forward, and often are, when they're getting the information that's helping them make a better decision. So it does help them get toward where they're going, and they feel it helps feed their confidence in whatever direction they're going to be going. I think the challenge to being in power is that they can often get stuck there. So it becomes it has the potential to become a crutch, and it opens into that space of what else is going on? Is there a fear that's happening here of moving forward, or confidence level, or not sure where you're going and what goes on there? So people tell you that they're in power, sometimes literally, when you ask, tell me what your wins are for the week, or what's been going on. Well, I'm still looking at this, or I'm researching, or I've been talking to. So they have all those pieces, and then you find out, what are you doing with that information? And then they're planning, and they're putting together some kind of grid, or their Gantt chart, or whatever it is. But again, the challenge to that sometimes is that as you listen to what they're telling you, you have to balance that piece of, are they getting ready to do the work, and then how much time are they versus just doing the work. And so a lot of times clients get stuck. We all get stuck sometimes getting ready to do whatever it is, and sometimes there's that piece of feeling busy instead of feeling productive, so that it's still we're kind of running off
that analysis paralysis. I was going to ask,
yes.
what does that look like? And it's like that endless preparation. So
yeah.
it's good you're gathering the information, you're planning, you're strategizing, but if you never take action, where does that
right?
get you?
But I've color coded all my files, and I've set up folder, whatever, those kinds of things. So it still feels like you're making progress, but there's something else potentially going on. And again, sometimes in the way they're talking about it, it's about the getting ready piece. And they actually might be resistant to moving forward because they don't know where to go next, or again, it's the confidence or not sure in those pieces.
Okay. Yeah, Pam, to your point, what I find, and this can be done when I'm dealing with, let's say, a CEO, and I see a whole lot of activities that just ended up in power, yes. Then I begin to think, okay, you're editing reality. That's the way I put it. Overstating your ability, understating the challenge because you want to feel like you're in control. And if I may, I love to use movies. The movie A Few Good Men with Tom Cruise and Demi Moore and all that, as they're getting ready to go to the courtroom, I mean, their key witness, Mortensen, has committed suicide. They can't get these travel records they want. I mean, the case is coming apart. And they're up in the hotel room, and Tom Cruise, who's had a few too many drinks, he starts blustering. He says, "Well, we're going to do this, and we just simply have to get Colonel Jessup to admit to a code red."
Yes.
And the other attorney, "How are you going to do that?" And he goes, "I don't know." And I think that's kind of it. I'm desperate to be in control, but and I'm going to edit my reality, to stay in control. And that is, you're exactly right. That's the real downside. And I see, particularly, frankly, among hard-driving senior level executives, they're so used to, they not only want to be in control, they want to appear to be in control, and they'll do anything to hang on to that kind of reality.
What are some of the upsides of power? We've talked about the downsides, which I think is important to know, but what would you say are the upsides?
Well, I certainly think that there's you're getting information. I mean, getting information, making an informed decision, having a plan to actually move forward certainly makes sense. I had a client who was very driven to get things done and was getting pressure actually from up above on a new project, a very high visibility, high important project. And it was kind of this push to go. And he was really paying attention to where he was feeling and all of that. And he felt like he needed to stop and get some more information, even though there was pressure from up above to go even faster. And in doing so, this stopping doesn't mean for weeks. It was just a couple of days while he, instead of making assumptions about some of the things, he went and asked some questions and talked to a couple different people about the different teams that were merging and some of the changes that were coming. And he learned some new information that would have had a tremendously negative impact on the project had he not stopped to ask some questions and just make assumptions. And since he'd been in their roles, earlier in his career, this is how it was. Well, things have changed. And so just the fact that to gather the information and to engage the people, so it wasn't just the information, but the team members and the other units then felt more engaged in what was going on, and they had more buy-in into the project then because somebody actually came and asked their opinions or just checked in with them. So the upside to power and learning, gathering, processing, and planning certainly has the potential to give you really a good way to go with that, just as long as you don't get stuck there.
Yeah, and it's the whole idea of being in control, and the fact that Jeff mentioned that in stress, it's kind of emotionally ruled, and power very logically ruled. So you're not going to be swung emotionally by the wins and losses, if you will.
Yes.
So, not too many highs, not too many lows, just kind of looking at the situation more rationally and probably in a more resourceful place to solve problems. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So very powerful that way, very much in control. So go ahead, Paul.
I don't think we'd use this term, but kind of what Pam was talking about. I think it's a kind of an honest awareness of both the challenge and my ability, and keeping those in balance. And I think what it does is keeps this kind of sounds kind of Zen-like, but it keeps your energy from being drained away with, oh my gosh, what's the challenge or what's my ability? You've got to kind of a comfort level with both, which really just, geometrically there allows you to move forward much more confidently, much more purposefully.
Yeah, and I don't think it's wrong to even say Zen-like. I think that can be what it looks like sometimes with certain clients. They almost are Zen-like. I mean, I look at someone like, I don't know how many people follow tennis here, but like Roger Federer on the tennis court. I'm sure he's in power stress for a lot of the game, but I'll tell you, he just looks calm, cool, and collected the whole time, in the way he approaches the game. So
I don't recall the name of the Hungarian psychologist. If I could pronounce, I don't know if I can pronounce it. It's missing a few vowels for me, but I think we all know who he authored the concept of the flow, or sometimes we call it the zone. And the zone is
it's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
Wow, there you go.
Let somebody do it. I wasn't going to try.
Very, very good. We need an educator on here in the panel. But yeah, it's just that idea of, just kind of an unfettered approach to whatever has to get done. We lose track of time and energy, and that's how I see the positive side of this control area.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, let's talk about the next level of tension, which is power apathy. And I think, Jeff, you're going to talk about this again.
I am. So power apathy is the obviously the state below power where people find themselves, much like what we were just talking about, getting stuck there. As you get stuck in power, you start to slide down into power apathy, where you feel like your ability outweighs the challenge, which is to say, I got this. This isn't a problem for me, which can be good, but it also can be bad when a bump comes along in the road that you're not quite ready for, or that you've maybe looked past an opportunity or a challenge that if you were a little bit more focused, you would have seen. In power apathy, I think ambivalence is a good word. People seem to think that they're more on top of the game than they might actually be. And I find a lot of high-level executives that have been in their job for a number of years are there 90% of the time. And you talk to their subordinates and you hear a lot of, well, gosh, if he would just recognize that this is going on, we could solve it. But anytime you bring it up, his eyes go to the floor, or he starts thinking about something else, or the engagement isn't there. And so power apathy is a good thing when you are in fact fully resourced and you've got the ability to solve the challenge repetitively and easily. That's what kind of all corporations would like to get to. But then the downside of it is certainly a little bit of sleep at the wheel, a little bit of opportunity lost. My example, my direct example is I've got a client who is a professional and they're very good at what they do, and they own a company now, and they need to start focusing on a little marketing and a little internal business, internal culture development. And he kind of thinks it's just going to happen by doing and not being strategic about it. And as it evolves, we've missed I've seen him miss a lot of opportunities to capitalize on, whether it's a culture building scenario, or he sort of just expects everybody to be as good as he is, and it's difficult to get him to focus on those tasks that are not in his sweet spot, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, the activities that fall here are activities that tend to be routine and repetitious. So I always point at like stuff around the house, the laundry, mowing the lawn, things like that. It's like I have plenty of ability to do it, but if someone else wants to take it off my hands, have at it. So those are the activities, and I guess that's an upside, is that we've got plenty of ability to do it, and we can do it without a ton of thought. The downside is, are we really creating change? And if someone's entire job resides here, and I've talked to people where that happens, they're usually not happy campers about their situation, because they want more challenge.
Boredom is a big deal here.
Yeah, they want more challenge. What else have you seen in terms of how would you know a client is in power apathy? Anybody else out there have any experience with this?
Here's a quote. It's a phrase I hear a lot. Yeah, I'm not worried about that though. I'm not worried about that though. They'll say something and I'm not worried about that though.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes that could be true. They're truly not worried about it, and sometimes again they're slipping into this thing about it's too hard to figure out, or I'm not in control, and so I'm just going to kind of rationalize in my own mind. I'm not going to worry about it because I don't know how to worry about it.
Right, exactly. And
that goes back to people's absolute need to feel like they look like they're in control. They don't want to enter into anywhere they might look like they don't have all the answers in certain circumstances.
Yeah, when we talk about paying attention to tension, I hope you're starting to see out there that in terms of this change grid, whether you have a piece of paper in front of you or just understand this change grid's really a map of somebody's brain, somebody's head, right? They're going to be paying attention to things up here in stress, power stress, and paying less attention to the things down here. So again, we're entering that zone in here in power apathy where things are comfortable. If you think about the parts of your job, for example, that are pretty routine, you can do them. It's not like you have to do a lot of preparation to do it. Doesn't take a lot of skill. You probably don't like them, but everybody has a certain percentage of their job that requires that. If you have like 80% or more, you want to certainly consider delegating or trying something new, because you're probably not going to be real fulfilled in that. So should we go to the next one? Anyone else have any comments on this one, or should we go to our lowest level of tension?
Well, real quick, this is Tom.
Sure.
A real quick comment is that sometimes we can feel, the universal, that it's not that big a challenge when we're thinking about something, but then when we go to do it, so the difference between cognitive and behavioral sometimes factors in here. And as I think it was Paul said, or maybe Jeff, that they don't think it's that big a challenge, but then when they get into action, sometimes it can go right there up to stress. It didn't seem like that big a deal because they were in the analytical state, which often is a power apathy state.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into that. Notice that they're rating their perceived challenge, perceived ability. So when they're looking at these things, it's how they're feeling about the activity at that moment in time. So if they're thinking about it without doing it, they may have be at a slightly different level of tension than right before they're doing it, or if they have to do it. So
because they understand it, and it doesn't seem that big a challenge.
Yeah,
if you gave them a test, they pass the test.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't mean they can do it.
Yeah, good insight. All right, well, let's move on to.
Before we go to apathy, I want to share my analogy that I use to explain.
Oh, sure, please.
This whole thing. I'm in Denver, so skiing is a thing here, but you can relate this to mountain biking or cycling or rollerblading or whatever. The whole thing can be explained in terms of a relatively good athlete at their game, in this case skiing. If they're standing on a slope that is not challenging to them, they're bored. If they're standing on a slope that is more challenging than they feel like they can do, they're scared. And if they're standing on a slope with a couple of things that might be neat and a couple of challenges that they've never tried, they might be super engaged and having fun. And so that's kind of the analogy that I use when I'm trying to explain attention to people who have heard of it before. Is sometimes the boredom leads to mistakes that you don't want to make and you wouldn't make if you were more engaged. And sometimes the fun pushes your limit and makes you even better, makes you enjoy the day more. And then, so that's my analogy for the whole thing. I wanted to share that.
Yeah, no, that's good. That is a good.
If I may, that kind of got me going on a thought here. As we're doing this discussion, we just finished up the 2018 Olympics, and speed skating. One of the events, I'm sorry, I don't know the name of it, is a combination of really legging it out with some good, easy or moderate laps, and then interrupted by these sprint laps, right?
I saw that. Yeah.
I actually think power apathy is not necessarily a bad place. I think power apathy to me also may be those the laps in between those sprint laps when you can use your abilities to the fullest. It's not that hard. You're not worried about sliding out. Somebody's not necessarily going to overtake you during those laps. It's a little bit of a breather. So I just want to make sure that we don't necessarily portray power apathy as a negative. I think it's a little bit of a chance to relax. When we look at the chart, it oftentimes is a full use of your ability, just not to get up against the greatest challenge.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a good point. I was going to make a similar point in that, again, remember, this is all contextual on what activity we're talking about, the moment in time and so forth. So it's good to have some things. Look, if I had to be in power stress to empty my dishwasher, that would not be a really healthy place to be, right? I mean, there's certain things we want to have there that should be there. It's not necessarily a bad place. It really depends. Now, if I have to really make something happen, make some immense change in my life or in my work, make a presentation that's going to persuade a board or something, I probably don't want to be at this level of tension for that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about even a lower level of tension. And this one can be somewhat controversial. So we'll get into it, even because of its name. But it's called apathy. So Paul, tell us what your experience has been with this level of tension.
Well, I was going to talk about this, but I don't really care to now. That's a joke.
Good one.
Like I tell my clients, you're not going to like the word that I'm going to talk about here, but I use apathy because nobody wants to believe they're in apathy. Sure, we can use words like complacency or anything else. But just like in my view of stress, largely nothing happens in stress and nothing happens in apathy. In fact, in its worst form, I call it the Unabomber. It's the brooding, insolent genius in the corner. Well, I could fix it if somebody would just ask me, But really what it is, I think what motivates people out of apathy is, you're wasting a talent and a gift and a capability and a resource that ought to be applied. I mean, you argue there's a level of selfishness if you stay in apathy too long. I do think apathy and stress are sometimes confused. They just see the inaction and they don't know what it is. And it's either stress or apathy, but there's a big difference between the two. And what I had a client one time, it was really funny. He's a very confident guy, but we'd be talking about an issue and he'd say, I'm not too worried about that. When I look at it, it'll go away. Like he's like a magnifying glass burning ants for kids or something like that. Like, what is that supposed to mean? He just felt so confident. When I turn my attention to it, I'll deal with it. Of course, then the obvious question was, well, when are you going to deal with it? That's evidence of the apathy part. I do think there's a positive to apathy. I just think at some point you just need to be able to park yourself. The rest of our ChangeWorks process says that this is also the area we have a chance just to think, kind of go to the cabin for a day and do that reflective, strategic thinking that you need to be doing. So it's not necessarily all negative, but obviously it's not a place you stay for very long.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, each of these levels of tension really have an upside and a downside. So apathy, I think, has a negative connotation. If you look in the Greek, it means without concern. So I make sure people know that. I remember one time going through with a prospect going through a change grid, and she got really offended by this term. She says, apathy, that's worse than hate. That's the opposite of love, which it really isn't if you look at the definition of it. So she wasn't really correct in that, but it was a misunderstanding. So, I'm careful to explain this to clients as, an apathy, first of all, it's the natural byproduct of mastering something, correct? And, because look at where someone's perceived ability is relative to the perceived challenge. So again, if we go back to the weightlifting example, I can lift 150 pounds. I can bench press that. If someone puts 10 pounds on there, it's almost going to feel like a waste, right? Like I don't even have to try. I can do this in my sleep, right? So, whereas in stress, we're so concerned about something we can't sleep. In apathy, we're so good at something we can do it in our sleep.
I think there's a tendency to see these things as passive states, and I think there's a positive aspect of apathy I'd like to throw out here, and that is intentionality around it. I mean, for example, in a very specific business situation, let's say somebody has a conflict they know they could have with somebody. In battle of wits, I could win that. I could beat him or her. I choose not to. I choose not to engage in that fight or that conflict. That's actually a positive side of apathy. I've got the ability to win there. I choose not to. So I think we have to be careful. And that word apathy does sort of suggest a negative connotation, but as you say, depending upon the situation, there's some real positives also as well.
Now, I might actually that level of tension sounds more like power to me, because someone is making a very logical choice there. Whereas in apathy, I don't know if we're even thinking that way. I think we're just almost unconsciously responding to something because we feel we're so good at it. So
this is Tom. I often help people. It does not mean apathetic, which is I don't care. I always remind people that it's called ChangeWorks, and it's only relative to change. So for example, if I tie my shoes every day and I feel I'm good enough, like I could get a trainer and I could probably knock some time off my shoe tying, but it's not important enough to change. And I've mastered it. So where we get into trouble is the world changes. If I hurt my arm, I would learn to tie my shoe with the non-dominant hand, and it would be worth learning it. But doing that just to create a challenge in that area is not a good idea. So what will automatically raise the tension sometimes is I used to get addicted to all of this potential stuff. And one day they were saying, well, what are you going to put on your tombstone? And he had potential. It doesn't matter how much potential you have at some point. It's about activating your potential. And that doesn't happen in apathy over time. So we have to just take a look at what makes it more important. If it isn't important and you've mastered it, then there's no reason to change just to change. So the point, again, that I have to stress is that change doesn't happen there. And teenager often says it's like a velvet glove. There's all kinds of missed opportunities. And then back to what I think Paul said is that some of them may choose not to take. But we lose awareness. Just because we've mastered something doesn't mean it's going to produce what we want over time.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, look, if you like how things are going and things are going well, apathy may be a fine place to be.
And you're good at it. So things are going well. You're good at it.
Right.
You don't need to get better just to have more challenge because you can. You don't need to get better at every single thing you do. But if it's in the way, if that activity is in the way of a bigger result, then we need to analyze, do we want to stay in apathy?
Yeah, apathy is not a place where you're changing, right? It's a place where we've mastered something, we're good at it. The downside of that potentially is that the world constantly is changing. So, I always think of like a Blockbuster, for example. I got to believe they were in apathy because they didn't move from having DVDs to the streaming quick enough, and Netflix kind of forced them out of business, So that's what can happen.
Just had a discussion today.
Squash the digital camera because they said digital. Oh, and we're in the business, so we're going to not produce a digital camera. They could have had it 5 years before anybody had one. Their R&D company came up with it. They said, "Oh, it's going to mess up our. We're really good at film producing."
Yeah, Paul, go ahead. You were going to share something.
Go ahead.
Well, it was a complex issue. I just had a discussion today with a group of major property developers. These are the people that 20 years ago were putting up shopping malls. They're really good at it. And they're really good at mining census data and a lot of other demographic stuff to make the right decisions about where to site, retail stores, for example. But get as to the points that's raised earlier, their whole world has been turned upside down, increasing urbanization of population, fragmentation of population. All of a sudden they have to become experts, not in the suburban mall, but how to redevelop inner cities. And create, that's a whole different sense of neighborhood around urban environment. And to your point, they were very good at what they did before, but the world has changed in a big way, so their challenge has gone way up. And I watched it happen right in front of me. They're moving out of apathy. At one point, I thought they were going to swing all the way to stress, but they became keenly aware that the challenge had changed.
Oh, great example. Thank you. Okay. Anything else on apathy, on these levels of tension? Okay, great. So let's have a little bit of a discussion now in terms of the coach and the coaching practice. And the first thing I want to think about with these 5 levels of tension is how will each level of tension impact, say, a prospect reaching out to a coach for help? What will we see in each level of tension here from a prospect? So if we had a prospect in stress, for example, what would that look like?
I've got to do something. I've got to do it now. Tell me what to do.
Yeah, I don't know how to do it. So
I have to, but I can't. 1 foot on the gas, 1 foot on the brake.
Would it be, how easy would it be to sell to prospect in stress, do you think? To get them to engage as a coach.
To me, that's it. Yeah, I don't charge it by the hour, but trust me, I make more by the hour with the stressful. They're so desperate to have the pain go away.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, they have very, very little ability, and we on this call represent all the abilities that they're looking for. So that's an easy one for me.
And so the answer is very easy. And the thing that you have to be careful about is we're not just looking to make a sale, we're looking to work with our ideal clients. And so we need to do some more investigation. But when it comes to closing, stress is easy.
Yeah, that's been my experience too, is that pretty easy to sell to because they are looking for help, right? Problem is they can be really tough clients because unless you can get them out of stress fairly quickly, you might get buyer's remorse. You're going to get a lot of impulsive, erratic kind of responses, and they can be pretty high maintenance as clients. So just something to be aware of.
Well, and sometimes they have unrealistic expectations of what our role is as coach.
Yep.
And so when they're in that space, what they really want us to do is sometimes just do it for them, or really be very prescriptive in what they should do. And so that can cause throw a monkey wrench into the relationship too, if we're not very clear about what coaching is or how we're going to approach whatever it is they're doing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So it will be hard to have, what we call kind of a active coaching relationship with them
Right.
If they think, hey, you're going to be more of a consultant to me, you're going to tell me what to do.
Right.
What I like to do is, Tom, I like to offer a jumpstart momentum package so that you can set expectations. They have a little money invested because you don't want to normalize and say, oh, it's nothing to worry about. You'll never get the sale. So you get a sale, and it's a short duration, and it sets expectations and does some of the things Pam is talking about. And then you get a sense, is this going to be a good client to work with, and can we build on it? And they get a sense. If they really thought coaching was going to solve all their problems and had unrealistic expectations, they start to realize Valium would do that better. And so a jump start, the goal isn't just to relieve the stress. The goal is to get a plan so it doesn't recur as an upset. So I love short duration coaching packages for both the client and the coach, so that you start to understand, are we a fit? And we have to experience for the close, all we need is stress. They're ready. You say, here's what you do, boom, and they sign. But for a working coaching relation, we need to explore beyond that.
Okay, great.
The author of this system, has taught me, because all my engagements, I'm very relationship based in my coaching, a lot of long-term relationships. We kind of go where things go. But I've learned that, when somebody comes in, they've got something on their mind. If we can work with that issue, that maybe that's how you build a relationship. But what I do to kind of work off your point there, I say, okay, I know A is on your mind. What else is while we're together here? First though, what else is on your mind? I'll make them list out 3 or 4 things. And I say, so what's most important to you right now today? Well, it's number 1. I said, well, tell you what, why don't we work on that? Let's not worry about the other stuff yet. We'll get to that later. I'm sort of setting myself up for, let's solve the first thing, but this is not a transactional solve the problem, go away. This is, we're going to use this first issue to find out how well we work together. And that's one way I try to extend the client relationship and hopefully have a more lasting impact.
Great. It's a great tip. Love it. So how about power stress? What's a prospect going to look like that's in power stress?
They're pretty ready to engage.
Yeah, ready to buy, right?
Yeah.
They're ready to buy, and they're demonstrating eagerness and resolve.
Yeah, kind of like if we could have all our prospects in this level of tension, that would be ideal, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
So how about power? What's that look like?
Kicking tires.
Yeah, kicking tires.
A lot of times people are investigating, and when they're talking to you, you're just one of their many points of investigation. So
yeah, they're shopping.
One of the reasons you don't want to give away free coaching is because people in power, or stress for that matter, tend to use that hour or however many units of time you give them, and then move on to their next potential solution.
Or go for endless cups of coffee. When I first got into coaching, I fell into that. Before I had the ChangeWorks, it's like they're very sincere, and they say, "Oh, you're the greatest," and then you go to try and get a sale, and they go, well, "Let's have another cup of coffee."
Well, right, and we've talked about what happens when you give free coaching. You're providing a resource which actually takes them away. If we think, hey, the sweet spot's up here in power stress, or if we say, we've talked about the threshold of activation, if we say for argument's sake that person's threshold of activation is this line between power stress and stress, they're in power and we're giving them free coaching. We're taking them down grid. We're taking them away from this threshold, aren't we?
And I can't get those 5 years back, but I learned
5 years of wisdom, right?
I do a free discovery session, and it's geared to raise the level of tension.
Exactly.
And I don't do things to lower it during the discovery session. But I didn't know that for a long time, and I thought I was helping people by having endless cups of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody can learn from that, take it and run.
Yeah, I never take a prospect to breakfast, lunch, or coffee. It's always in my office, and it's 2 hours. And if they're not ready for that, then I say that's okay. If we're not ready. The thing that I hear on power is, I go back to that word control. What I hear from them is all the stuff that's going well and how great they are. I usually get the resume, right? It's usually
Okay.
the discussion. There's hardly ever mention early on of any pain point or anything they're struggling with. I also think in the relationship, the dating dance here is they don't see this. They want to maintain control of this relationship. They tend to treat you as a supplier rather than as a pure relationship.
Okay.
Somebody mentioned earlier they're shopping around, and they're probably shopping around for price or who knows what, but they want to have a relationship, I think, that they want to control, and I don't see them seeing it as a peer relationship, which is very important to me.
Okay. Yeah. I guess one of the things I've found with this is someone in power is going to obviously, like, they're shopping, they're trying to get information. They usually want more information. They'll ask a lot of questions. They're more likely to give you objections, you know, after you've made your little presentation or whatever you do. The other thing I found though is if you do convert one of these folks that start in power, they tend to be awesome clients, like very loyal clients too, because they've made a really good decision. Where someone in stress, may question their decision because they made it maybe more impulsively. Someone in power has done their research, done their homework, done their due diligence, and I've had prospects in power that have been clients for years. So, anybody else have that experience?
It seems to me that the act of buying, maybe just for that moment of pulling the trigger, but those people who came to you in power, you probably raised their tension a bit in order for them to make that move from kicking tires to pulling the trigger.
Yes.
And generally speaking, moving from power to power stress creates a better relationship going forward than going from stress to power stress. Just in my view.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that if I had a choice between the two. I mean, both can work. But yeah, obviously we'd love everyone to start here, but if they have to go from here to here, we always have these discussions when I do presentations. This is everyone's favorite place for the prospect. I said, what's your second favorite place? And there's always a debate between these two levels of tension. Let's talk about power apathy. What does that look like? Prospects in power apathy.
Send me a proposal and let me think about it.
Yeah, that actually may be a really good example of power apathy. I mean, in terms of that might be a real positive one. You wonder, it's almost like they're on the phone with you, but they're kind of being polite and listening, but I'm not sure they have a whole lot of intention to hire. I mean, when you think of how much work you have to produce to get them up here. Anybody else have a different experience?
Well, if it's different, but to the extent that a lot of my clients are senior executive, they're coming to me at their own volition. But as you know, we can always get a client where the CEO of the board said, really, I'd like you to get a coach. And so they're not there necessarily, of their own choice. And so they're kind of checking off the box and passivity around it. I would think that would be power apathy as well.
That's a great example.
By the way, the thing about sending the proposal is interesting. I never send a proposal. I never want to have anybody.
That's what they
I never want to have anybody process. I never want to have anybody process our relationship in my absence, because it hardly ever goes to a good place.
So I didn't get my response to that. My response is, let's think it over together. So I could raise the tension.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you guys on that.
But that was their response out of power apathy. That's why I said that.
Paul, just going back to your example of the exec that has been kind of assigned a coach. When you're in that situation, how do you get them out of power apathy and more engaged in the process? What's been your experience there?
Because they'll usually use the word, my boss thinks I should, they told me I need to, it's all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And I literally will put my hands and I'll wait like I'm waving gnats, and I'll say, that's fine. But what do you want? And I'll ask it 3 or 4 times if I have to, what do you want? And I'll finally get to something, and that's where the engagement is.
Nice.
It's hardly ever going to be around what your boss thinks.
Nice.
Even if they say, well, even if they say, well, I think he's right. Well, then that shows me that's something they now want.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good. Good. All right. How about apathy for the prospect?
What prospect?
Exactly. Exactly. You're not going to get a call from someone in apathy, right? I mean, again, maybe you could get someone in apathy assigned to you. Maybe that's in a corporate situation. Maybe that happens. But yeah, otherwise, you're not going to get. They think everything's fine. They don't see a need for a coach. They're not looking to make any change, right? So why spend the money on a coach?
Yeah. If I may, I'm kind of animated on this one because
Okay.
I believe you have to be willing to lose a client to win a client, and I will throw them out. Essentially, throw them out of my office. And here's one that I did. I had a guy who was kind of the brooding genius in the corner, kind of guy, and I don't really care about this, and whatever, and a lot of bad behaviors. And I basically said, you remind me of 25 years ago. And he goes, huh? I said, I thought I was the smartest guy in the room. In fact, if anybody disagreed with him, I would show them, And I tell my personal story about how I blew up a perfectly good career. Nobody wanted to work with me, and I wasted. You talked about wasting 5 years over coffee. I wasted 10 years of my career, the last 5 years of my corporate career, and getting off to a bad start as a coach because I was determined to be the smartest guy in the room. And I was a CEO of an $18 billion business throwing coaches in front of me, trying to slow me down, and I kicked every one of them out of the way. And I basically said, I can't believe that I let that I wasted that part of my life. And so if I can help you not waste the same thing, I'm all in. But otherwise, unless you're all in, I'm out. I mean, it was that kind of a tough talk. And he almost came to tears and said, no, I need to do this. So that's just one of my really vivid examples.
Sounds like you woke up the sleeping giant, with that. So it's a good story. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, last kind of thing I want to talk about, again, going through these 5 levels of tension is how does it apply to us, when we look at our own level of tension as a coach and able to serve effectively. So if we're up in stress and we're coaching a client, what's that going to look like and what are the implications of that?
I think you're going to throw a bunch of different solutions at them and say, try these.
Okay.
I think it's going to be very disjointed potentially because you're so busy trying to think about what your next question should be or how am I doing as a coach instead of just being present with the person and trusting the process to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of it could be a lot of focus on your own performance as a coach.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. What else? Any other thoughts?
The way my coaching practice is set up, I book mornings and afternoons. I don't book anybody by the hour or sandwich them or anything else because I don't want that tension of things. But frankly, it's just also me. I need to clear my head. If I've got a client coming in at 9 a.m., at 8 o'clock, I'm intentionally kind of emptying myself, right? Interrogating my emotions, being very clear about what my objectives are for the meeting, which are usually very modest. And I think it's just a self-awareness that I have had to try to impose on myself. I call it interrogating my emotions and make sure that I'm pure. When they walk in that door, they know that I don't care about anything other than them. That's the only way I've been trying to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm getting this, that stress is not the place people think is ideal for coaching. It's going to be very reactive, right? And very much about trying to get some control over the session. Probably not a great place for a coach to be. How about power stress? What's that coaching look like?
I think engaged.
Okay, engaged. Kind of like you're on a mission, right? To see the client succeed.
Yeah, I mean, maybe being the force, maybe being the driving force for the discussion, sort of trying to. And I guess there's where the accident may occur is when you're pushing too hard. It might be perceived as disingenuous or maybe too pushy, and they're not ready to be pushed yet, and that kind of thing.
This may be kind of a funny pattern. I have a whiteboard in my office, and what I would say is when I'm under stress, I'm up at the whiteboard, right, trying to prove myself. Power stress, we're probably both up at the whiteboard collaborating and trying to chart out what we're talking about.
Okay.
Power, the client is up at the whiteboard. Power apathy. We're both looking at each other like who wants to be at the whiteboard, and apathy, no, we're not even picking up the pen. That's kind of a funny way to do it.
Yeah, good. I like that. Another good metaphor. Yeah, and look, you can see where there's times where a coach in power stress can be really powerful, right? Like sometimes you stand in the gap for your client, like with the client's lacking confidence or whatever, so you're encouraging them. That might be something you do in power stress, right? Where you're saying, wait a minute, let's look at this, what's going to take, let's go out and do this, the client's going to be the one doing it, but it's almost like that place where you may challenge them or you may inspire them. That could happen up there. What about power?
Well,
Go ahead. Sorry.
Tom, I was just going to say it bears repeating what you said before about it being contextual, and knowing that you could accidentally, that was needed, and then you forgot to back up a little bit and hand the marker to them, and all of a sudden you're doing consulting or managing them inadvertently. So the need for power stress was appropriate in the context that you had. We just have to keep our awareness up.
Yeah. Again, I don't think if every coaching session's in power stress, it may not be. There's going to be times where that may not be appropriate. So what does power look like in for a coach when you're in power?
There's an expression that says insecurity, is loud, and confidence is quiet. I experience power more when I'm quiet anyway, but with a client. But I like to be very quiet. I'm very comfortable with silence. I think there's a quiet confidence that comes through. So that's my interpretation of that.
Okay, good. Like it. Yeah, I'm thinking about being in that place where you're curious, you're asking powerful questions. We're gathering information together. We're gathering insight together. I would say this is probably kind of that sweet spot of that coaching that we've been trained to do. Power apathy, what does that look like? I know we're both not at the whiteboard. I know that, but what else? Maybe going through the motions. If my tension's in power apathy when I'm coaching someone, maybe I'm kind of half listening. Again, I'm feeling like my ability as a coach is much greater than the challenge. So it's like, okay, I've heard this scenario about 1,000 times with various clients. Here it is again. So maybe I'm not really on my toes in terms of, like, Pam, the word you used I really liked was presence. Maybe my presence isn't fully there. Kind of going through the motions of a coach, and the client may not be picking that up either. I may be so good at that the client doesn't know. But
yeah, not asking those next level questions then. So when they say something, you just run with it, and maybe there's another question that could uncover something. But what the heck? I'm sure this is where it's going to go anyway. So sometimes making our own assumptions about what's happening.
Well,
Yeah, absolutely.
again, not assigning a negative or positive to it, but there's times when I'll just let a client just exhaust themselves, because I need to go somewhere next. I'm not going to engage in whatever their crisis of the moment is. I don't know if this is the right time to bring this up, but what's interesting? This group's got me thinking here. Sometimes I am who I am, Popeye. I don't try to take on behaviors that aren't natural, but at the same time, if I can model power stress or power apathy or somewhere where I want them to be and to go, sometimes that can be good. is they start to see in me what they want for themselves. So I tend to not ramp up just because they're ramping up. Sometimes I'll go the opposite direction just so they can start to feel the tension, the productive tension of being in a different place.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, it does. I love it. Love it. Okay, and finally, apathy. What's that coaching look like?
I'm not sure that's really fair to call that coaching. But
the coach in apathy is going to do what with a client? What's that interaction going to look like?
Well, Pam said something earlier. I think it's just a magnification of it. Not asking the next question, right? Not trying to move it forward. Just accepting what the client says, and whoops, it's 2 o'clock. I guess we're done. But right. I like what Pam said. It's our job to move our clients forward, and a lot of that is what's the next question that I should ask?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is really about change, right? And helping the client make changes. And if we're in apathy about what we're doing, which means we're really feeling very good about what we're doing, but you feel in apathy, you're losing your edge potentially, because every client is different, every situation is different, every moment is different, right? So, even though we might feel, okay, we've been here before, we've seen this before, we can get a little complacent with that, if our tension's down there. So, well, cool. Any final thoughts before we wrap up here about the levels of tension? Okay, great. Well, that concludes our discussion session today on the introduction to tension. I want to thank all of our faculty members for their great insights today. Thank you, guys. And your next
Thank you very much, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. Your next step in the program now is to move on to the application session 2, where you will have activities and exercises that help you integrate these concepts even further. So go at it, and I'll see you on the next discussion call.